captured and caged. Zaira sat in the cold, dark cell, her hands and feet bound in thick metal chains. The air smelled of rust, sweat, and fear. Around her, other prisoners huddled together, whispering in hushed voices. Some were crying, others sat in silent despair. The auction house was no place for the hopeful. She had been here for 6 days. No food, only dirty water, and the constant fear of what would come next. She had watched as other prisoners were taken away, sold like objects to cruel masters. She knew her turn would come soon. Zaira was not strong, not a warrior. Her species, the Valari, were small, delicate, and peaceful. They were thinkers, not fighters. That's why they were easy prey for the Syndicate, the ruthless organization that ran the slave markets across the galaxy. She pulled weakly at the chains around her wrists. Useless. There was no escape. A loud metal clang echoed through the hall. Zaira flinched. The auction was starting. A giant 4-armed alien guard stomped into the cell. His red eyes scanned the prisoners before landing on Zaira. A cruel smile spread across his face. "You. Time to be sold." He grabbed her by the arm and yanked her to her feet. Zaira stumbled but couldn't fight back. Her legs were too weak, her body too frail. The guard dragged her through a long corridor until they reached a massive metal door. He pressed a button, and the door slid open with a heavy hiss. The auction hall was bright and crowded. Aliens of all shapes and sizes filled the rows of seats, bidding on slaves like they were buying cattle. Some were dressed in expensive robes, others in combat gear. Merchants, warlords, crime lords, all here to buy living beings. Zaira's stomach twisted. She was shoved onto a raised platform, where a robotic voice began announcing her details. Lot number 47. Species, Valari. Female. Age, 24 galactic cycles. Price starts at 500 credits. A fat alien with green skin lifted his hand. 600. 700. 800. The numbers rose quickly. Zaira wanted to scream, to run, but there was nowhere to go. Then she heard a voice she wasn't expecting. A human voice. 5,000 credits. Silence fell over the hall. Everyone turned to look at the speaker, a tall human with short brown hair and cold, calculating eyes. He wore a black jacket, a blaster on his hip, and a confident smirk on his face. His presence alone demanded respect. Zaira had never seen a human in real life. Their kind were rare in this part of the galaxy. The other bidders whispered among themselves. Why would a human bid so high for a weak Valari? The auctioneer cleared his throat. 5,000 credits, going once, going twice. But before he could finish, a deep voice growled from the crowd. 10,000 credits. A massive alien warlord with thick armor and a scared face stepped forward. His red eyes burned with cruelty. "She belongs to me," he growled. The human tilted his head slightly. His smirk faded. For a moment, Zaira saw something dangerous in his expression, something cold and deadly. "I don't think so," the human said. The warlord sneered. "This is a syndicate auction. You can't just take what you want." The human sighed. Then, before anyone could react, he reached for his blaster. Boom! A single gunshot rang through the hall. The warlord dropped to the floor, a smoking hole in his chest. The room exploded into chaos. The human pulled another gun from his jacket and shot the guards at the auction table. Syndicate enforcers rushed forward, but he was faster. His hands moved like lightning, his blaster taking down enemies one after another. Zaira froze in shock. Was this real? Was someone actually fighting for her? The human jumped onto the platform and cut the chains from her wrists. "Can you run?" he asked, his voice sharp but steady. Zaira's legs trembled. I don't know." "Try." He grabbed her hand and pulled her forward. Her feet stumbled at first, but the fear of being left behind gave her strength. She ran. Blaster shots exploded around them. The human moved quickly, taking down enemies with deadly precision. They reached the auction hall's exit, but more syndicate soldiers were coming. The human pressed a button on his wrist. "Get ready. We're coming in hot." A second later, a massive explosion rocked the building. The ceiling cracked, and smoke filled the air. Outside, a ship hovered in the night sky, its side door open. A large alien with gray skin waved them over. "Hurry up, Captain," he shouted. The human turned to Zura. "Can you jump?" She hesitated. "I jump." With one last burst of energy, she leaped toward the open door. Strong arms caught her and pulled her inside. The human followed, landing smoothly before turning back to the syndicate guards. He threw a small metal sphere onto the ground. Boom! The entire auction house exploded into flames. The ship's door closed, and Zara felt them rising into the sky. The syndicate was left behind. She sat on the floor, gasping for breath, her body shaking. The human crouched beside her. "You're safe now," he said. For the first time in her life, Zara wasn't sure if she was still a prisoner, or if she had just been rescued by a human who was unlike anyone she had ever met before. Escape and pursuit. The ship lurched forward, its engines roaring as it blasted away from the burning auction house. Inside, Zara collapsed against the cold metal walls, her breath ragged, her heart pounding so hard it hurt. She could still hear the gunfire, the screams, the explosion that had swallowed the syndicate's auction hall. The memory was so fresh, so sharp, that it felt like she was still there, trapped in that nightmare. But she wasn't. She was on a ship, a human ship. She looked up, her wide violet eyes landing on the man who had just destroyed an entire auction house for her. He stood near the entrance, gripping a metal railing as the ship swayed. His dark jacket was scorched at the edges, his blaster still smoking in its holster. The human, Captain Daniel Carter, turned toward her, his sharp blue eyes assessing her quickly. "You all right?" he asked. His voice was steady, calm, like none of this had been a big deal. Zira opened her mouth, but no words came out. Her mind was racing too fast. Why had he saved her? Humans were rare in this part of the galaxy. They were known to be warriors, explorers, mercenaries, but not heroes. Daniel frowned. "Can you speak?" Zira swallowed. Yes, I can speak." Her voice was hoarse, weak. "Good," he said, then turned toward the cockpit. "Slate, get us into hyperspace before those syndicate ships lock onto us." "Aye, Captain," a deep voice replied from the controls. Zara looked toward the pilot's seat, where a massive, gray-skinned alien with 4 glowing yellow eyes was working the ship's systems. His long, clawed fingers danced over the control panel with surprising speed. Zara felt another presence and turned to see a third crew member, a tall, feline-like alien with dark purple fur and piercing green eyes, watching her closely. She had a blaster on her hip, but her posture wasn't aggressive. Yet. "She's scared," the feline alien said. "Of course she's scared," Daniel muttered. He leaned against the wall, folding his arms. She was about to be sold to a warlord 5 minutes ago. Zira forced herself to breathe slower. Her arms ached from the chains that had bound her. Her skin still felt the weight of slavery. She curled her fingers into fists. What do you want from me?" she finally asked. Daniel raised an eyebrow. "I just saved your life. And I don't believe you did it for free." The feline alien chuckled softly. "She's not stupid." Daniel sighed. "Look, I don't have time for this. The syndicate is going to come after us, and I need you to sit tight and not pass out while we escape. Can you manage that?" Zira clenched her jaw. She hated feeling powerless. "I am not weak." "Good," Daniel said. "Then you should understand that you're in danger. The syndicate doesn't forget. They don't forgive. You were their property 5 minutes ago. Now, they'll see you as something worse, a loose end." Before she could respond, the ship shuddered violently. "Incoming fire," the pilot, Slate called out. Through the cockpit window, Zyra saw 3 Syndicate fighter ships streaking toward them, their plasma cannons glowing. They found us already. Daniel cursed. Hang on. The ship jerked to the right, narrowly dodging a plasma blast. The feline alien, who Zyra now guessed was the gunner, jumped into action, sliding into the weapons seat. Targeting their engines, she muttered. Firing. A rapid burst of energy rounds shot from the ship's cannons, slamming into the lead Syndicate fighter. The enemy ship exploded into fire and debris, but the other 2 ships kept coming. Zyra gripped the edge of a metal crate, her mind struggling to process what was happening. She had never been in a battle before, never even seen one up close. Daniel moved swiftly to a control panel and pressed a button. We're not gonna outrun them. Slate, prepare the EMP burst. Aye, Captain. One of the Syndicate ships fired a missile. The explosion sent the ship spinning wildly. Zyra screamed as she was thrown against the wall. Daniel caught her before she hit the ground. His grip was strong, steady. Stay down, he ordered before running back to the controls. The ship's lights flickered. Then a pulse of blue energy spread outward from their ship, disrupting all electrical systems nearby. The 2 enemy fighters suddenly lost power, their engines shutting down. They drifted helplessly in space. Got him, Slate grunted. Daniel exhaled and nodded, jumping to hyperspace. Now, the ship lurched forward, and in an instant, the stars stretched into long white streaks as they escaped into hyperspace. Moments later, silence. Zyra sat against the cold metal floor, her body still trembling. She could hear her own heartbeat pounding in her ears. Daniel rubbed his forehead and sighed. Well, that was messy. The feline alien let out a low whistle. You sure know how to make enemies, Captain. You think the Syndicate's mad? Daniel smirked. Good. Zyra took a slow breath, then looked up at him. I don't understand you. Daniel tilted his head. What's there to understand? Why did you save me? What do you want from me? Daniel's smirk faded. For a moment, he studied her, as if deciding whether to tell the truth. Then he said, I don't like slavers. Zyra narrowed her eyes. That's it. He nodded. That's it. She didn't believe him. No one in the galaxy did something for nothing. Daniel could see the doubt in her face, but he didn't argue. He turned to the others. Get some rest. We have a long trip ahead. As the crew dispersed, Zyra sat in the corner of the ship, her mind spinning. She was free. But somehow, she felt like her journey had only just begun. The human and his mission. The ship sailed through the silence of hyperspace, its engines humming softly. The once chaotic battlefield had been left behind, but inside Zyra's mind, the battle raged on. She sat on the cold metal floor, her arms wrapped around herself. She had spent her whole life fearing slavers, running from them, accepting that she was weak. Then, out of nowhere, a human had come crashing into her fate, shattering everything she believed in. Zyra wasn't sure if she was safe now. She wasn't sure if she had traded one master for another. Her eyes flickered toward Daniel Carter. The human captain stood near the control panel, speaking in low tones with the gunner, the feline-like alien named Shura, and the ship's pilot, Slate. Zyra studied him carefully. His body language was relaxed, but his eyes carried something cold, something calculating. He had killed without hesitation at the auction house. Destroyed the Syndicate's men as if it was just another day for him. What kind of person was this? What kind of human was he? The crew of the Solace. A deep voice rumbled behind her. You're staring at him like he's going to eat you. Zyra flinched and turned to see Slate, the massive gray-skinned alien with 4 glowing yellow eyes, watching her with amusement. He was twice her size, his muscular arms crossed over his broad chest. He's a killer, she said, her voice quieter than she wanted. Slate chuckled. That he is. And you follow him. Slate shrugged. I owe him my life. We all do. Zyra's brow furrowed. He saved you too. Slate nodded. Rescued me from an execution camp. Syndicate had me lined up for a public hanging. He burned the place down and walked me out like he owned the place. Zyra shivered. This human didn't just fight the Syndicate. He hunted them. Shura, the feline gunner, spoke without looking away from her control panel. Daniel doesn't just save people, Valari. He declares war. Zyra's throat tightened. On slavers. On anyone who thinks they own someone else. Shura replied, her emerald eyes sharp. You don't know humans, do you? Zyra hesitated. I've only heard stories. Shura smirked. Let me tell you the truth. Humans. They're terrifying. Slate chuckled. They're not the strongest. Not the fastest. Not even the smartest. But they don't stop. You put a human in chains, and they'll break them. You take everything from them, and they'll come for your throat. Zyra swallowed. She had always thought of her species, the Valari, as fragile creatures, but looking at the crew around her, she realized they had all been fragile once, until this human had pulled them out of their cages, and now they weren't fragile anymore. The captain's code. Zyra forced herself to stand, her legs still weak from days in captivity. She stepped forward cautiously. Captain Carter. Daniel glanced at her. You don't need to call me Captain. Then what should I call you? He smirked. Daniel works fine. She took a breath. I need to understand something. Why do you do this? Why risk your life for slaves? Daniel studied her for a long moment. Because someone has to. That's not an answer, she said sharply. His smirk faded. He exhaled, rubbing the back of his neck. You ever heard of Lyran 3? Zyra frowned. The mining colony. Daniel nodded. My sister, Maya, was taken there by the Syndicate. I was 17. I tried to get her back, but his jaw tightened. By the time I found her, she was already dead. Beaten to death by her owner. Zyra felt something heavy settle in her chest. She had expected something like this. No one went after slavers without a personal reason. I'm sorry, she said. The words felt too small for what he had suffered. Daniel shrugged. I don't do this for revenge. She tilted her head. Then why? Daniel's eyes burned with something she couldn't name. Because the galaxy lets monsters like the Syndicate exist. It looks the other way. It lets the weak suffer. He leaned forward slightly. Humans, we don't look the other way. Not when someone needs help. Zyra stared at him. He spoke as if it was the most obvious thing in the universe. You think all humans are like that? He gave her a small, sad smile. No, but the ones that matter are. Nowhere is safe. A sudden alarm blared through the ship, making Zyra jump. Proximity alert. Slate growled, slamming a button on the control panel. Something's wrong. Daniel's expression hardened. Syndicate. Shura swore under her breath. Not just Syndicate. They sent a warship. Zyra's blood ran cold. How? She breathed. We escaped. Daniel clenched his jaw. They must have put a tracker on you at the auction house. Zyra stiffened. Her mind flashed back to the slavers handling her, scanning her body, checking her teeth, her arms, her neck. The tracker. It's in my skin, she whispered, pressing her hands to her arm. They must have injected it before the auction. Daniel moved instantly, grabbing a small device from a locker. Sit, he ordered. Zyra hesitated, but his voice left no room for argument. She sat on the metal table, and Daniel knelt beside her, rolling up her sleeve. His touch was surprisingly gentle. He pressed the scanner against her arm, frowning. There, tiny implant near your wrist. Zyra clenched her teeth. Can you remove it? Daniel reached for a scalpel. This might sting. She nodded. The blade sliced into her skin. She hissed, but didn't pull away. Daniel worked quickly, pulling out a tiny metallic chip no larger than a grain of rice. Got it, he muttered, tossing it onto the floor and smashing it with his boot. Zyra let out a shaky breath. "Slate, change course," Daniel ordered. "We're not leading them back to our base." "Where to?" Daniel exhaled. "We need a place to disappear." Sura's ears flicked. "We could try Drift Station. No one asks questions there." Daniel nodded. "Good. Set course." Zyra clenched her fists. The syndicate had almost found her again. She looked up at Daniel. He had saved her twice now. For the first time, she began to wonder, maybe he really was different. Maybe he really meant it when he said humans don't look away. The syndicate strikes back. Drift Station, the edge of civilization. The Solace dropped out of hyperspace with a shudder, its engines cooling as it approached a massive floating structure in the void. Drift Station. Zyra had never seen anything like it before. The station was a monstrous junk heap of ships, all welded together over centuries into a lawless city floating in deep space. Faint neon lights flickered in the dark, illuminating shadowy figures and starships docked along its jagged metal arms. She swallowed. "This place looks dangerous." Daniel smirked. "That's why we're here." Drift Station was a haven for criminals, smugglers, and outlaws. No one asked questions here. No one cared who you were, as long as you could pay. "Let's make this quick," Daniel said, adjusting the strap of his holster. "We need a safe house, fuel, and—" His gaze landed on Zyra. Someone to scan her for any more surprises. Zyra stiffened. The tracker they had removed had nearly gotten them killed. What if there was another? She clenched her fists. She hated feeling weak. Daniel must have noticed her expression because his voice softened. "This isn't your fault. The syndicate marks their property. That doesn't mean you have to stay their property." Something about the way he said that made her chest tighten. Slate powered down the engines. "Docking complete. Let's move before someone recognizes us." Sura glanced at Daniel. "You sure you don't want to keep your head down? Lot of bounties get traded here." Daniel grinned. "Let them try." Zyra didn't doubt him. She had seen him kill without hesitation. But still, the way Sura and Slate acted around him, they weren't just his crew. They were his believers. And that scared her more than the criminals waiting outside. Shadows in the dark. The moment they stepped off the ship, Zyra felt eyes on her. The narrow metal streets of Drift Station were packed with alien merchants, bounty hunters, and desperate wanderers. Some sold weapons, others sold information, and some sold people. She felt sick. Daniel walked with calm confidence, his hand resting near his blaster. Sura and Slate flanked them, watchful, alert. They moved like hunters in a jungle of predators. Zyra, on the other hand, felt like prey. "Eyes up," Sura muttered. "Lot of syndicate scum here." Daniel nodded. "We find the doctor first." They entered a dimly lit shop where an old four-armed alien with milky white eyes examined them from behind a counter. His mechanical arms whirred as he picked up a scanning device. "No syndicate business," he rasped. Daniel tossed a handful of credits onto the counter. "Then you'll love us." The doctor smirked. "Who's getting checked?" Daniel motioned to Zyra. "See if they put anything else in her." She hesitated before stepping forward. The old alien waved the scanner over her body. It buzzed faintly, until it let out a high-pitched warning tone. Zyra's stomach dropped. Daniel's expression darkened. "Where?" The doctor tapped a spot just below Zyra's collarbone. Deep implant. Hard to detect. They weren't just tracking her. They were listening. Zyra felt her blood run cold. Slate cursed. "They heard everything." The doctor nodded. "If they were listening in, they already know where you are." Daniel's blaster was in his hand before the doctor finished talking. "We need to leave. Now." But before anyone could move, the door exploded inward. The syndicate's arrival. Zyra hit the ground as the blast knocked her backward. Smoke filled the small shop. A second later, she heard boots stomping on metal. "Fan out," a deep, growling voice ordered. Through the haze, Zyra saw 6 syndicate enforcers enter, weapons drawn. Heavy armor, plasma rifles, no hesitation. The leader, a tall alien with gray skin and glowing red eyes, stepped forward. His gaze locked onto Zyra, and a cruel smile stretched across his face. "You really thought you could run," he snarled. "You belong to us." Zyra's chest tightened. Not again. Daniel moved first. Before the syndicate enforcers could react, he shot 2 of them in the head. The room exploded into chaos. Shura lunged forward, slashing a mercenary's throat with a hidden blade. Slate grabbed one of the syndicate goons and smashed his head into the wall so hard the metal dented. Zyra barely had time to breathe before the syndicate leader grabbed her by the throat and slammed her against the wall. "Stop struggling," he hissed. "You're coming home." "No, not this time." With a scream, Zyra drove her knee into his stomach. He grunted, loosening his grip just enough for her to grab a discarded knife from the floor. She didn't think. She just acted. The blade sank into his side. The enforcer howled in pain and released her, staggering back. Daniel wasted no time. He grabbed Zyra by the wrist and yanked her toward the exit. "Move." The crew raced through the streets, syndicate forces close behind. Alarms blared. Doors slammed shut. Bounty hunters and smugglers watched with interest, waiting to see if they should join the fight or stay out of it. Then, over the comms, Slate's voice roared. "HEYVE-GOT-AGUNSHIP inbound." Zyra's heart stopped. A syndicate gunship hovered just beyond the docks, its cannons charging up for a blast. Daniel shoved her behind cover. "Stay down." He and Sura opened fire, their weapons ripping through enemy ranks, but the syndicate kept coming. There were too many. They were trapped. A desperate gamble. Daniel exhaled, glancing at Zyra. "You trust me?" She hesitated. He grinned. "Too bad. Hold on." Before she could question him, Daniel grabbed a grenade from his belt and threw it at the enemy ranks. Boom. The explosion sent syndicate enforcers flying into the air. He grabbed Zyra and ran straight for the edge of the platform. "What are you?" Before she could finish, he jumped off the edge of the station, dragging her with him. The air rushed past them as they plummeted toward the lower docks. Zyra screamed. Then, a ship swooped in beneath them. The Solace's side door was open, Slate standing inside with a grin. "Would have been easier to take the stairs, Captain," he called. Daniel landed first, rolling with the impact. Zyra collapsed beside him, gasping. "Go, go, go," Daniel shouted. The door slammed shut, and the Solace roared to life, escaping just as the gunship fired a blast that missed them by inches. They were alive. Barely. Zyra sat up, her entire body shaking. Daniel looked at her. "Still think I did this for free?" She stared at him, breathing hard. No, she didn't. She didn't understand him. But for the first time in her life, she wanted to. The human's dark past. The Solace streaked through the void, the ship's hull still warm from the near-death escape at Drift Station. Inside, the crew moved with the quiet tension of survivors, bruised but alive. Zyra sat in the corner of the common room, her hands clenched into fists. She had stabbed a man today. It hadn't felt like she expected. She had thought it would be empowering, that striking back at the syndicate would break the chains in her mind. But all she felt was cold. Across from her, Daniel sat at the table, flipping a knife between his fingers. His expression was unreadable. He hadn't said a word since they escaped. Finally, he spoke. "You did good back there." Zyra frowned. "I almost got us killed." Daniel smirked. "You wounded a syndicate officer and got out alive. That's better than most." She didn't respond. He tilted his head slightly. "You ever killed before?" Zyra's stomach twisted. "No." Daniel nodded, as if he expected that. He twirled the knife again. "It gets easier." She flinched. I don't want it to be easier. Daniel's expression darkened. His voice lowered. Then don't let it. She shivered. There was something about the way he said it, like it was coming from someone who had tried and failed. Slate's warning. The ship hummed softly as they drifted through an asteroid field, using the debris as cover. Slate walked in, stretching his massive arms. We're in the clear for now. No syndicate signatures on the scanners. Daniel exhaled, leaning back. Good. We'll lay low here for a bit. Slate didn't leave. Instead, he leaned against the wall, his 4 glowing yellow eyes fixed on Daniel. You want to tell her? Zira blinked. Tell me what? Daniel shot Slate a warning look, but the big alien didn't back down. She deserves to know, Slate said. She's not just another rescue, is she? Zira's heart skipped a beat. Daniel sighed and tossed his knife onto the table. Damn it, Slate. Zira stared at him. What is he talking about? Daniel rubbed his forehead. I didn't just find you by accident. Zira. A chill crept down her spine. What do you mean? Daniel looked her in the eyes. You're not the first Valari I tried to save. Silence. Zira's breath caught. What? Daniel exhaled. Your people. The Valari. The Syndicate's been selling them for years. They're fragile, intelligent, and don't fight back. That makes them valuable. Zira felt sick. I know that. Daniel's jaw clenched. A year ago, I found a Valari slave ship. They were transporting 40 of your people to the Syndicate markets. Zira's chest tightened. What happened? Daniel's hands curled into fists. I lost them. The words hit her like a punch. Zira's pulse pounded in her ears. All of them. Daniel's face was unreadable, but his voice was low and raw. The Syndicate burned the whole cargo bay when I got too close. His hands trembled slightly. They torched the prisoners before I could get inside. Zira's vision blurred. 40 of her people. Gone. Burned. Daniel closed his eyes. I swore I wouldn't fail the next time. He looked at her. That's why I was at that auction, Zira. That's why I wasn't leaving without you. The wrath of humanity. Zira felt like the room was spinning. She had always heard stories about humans, that they were ruthless warriors, that they never stopped, never surrendered. She had seen glimpses of it in Daniel. But this was different. This wasn't just anger. This was war. She swallowed. You're hunting them. Daniel met her gaze. I'm ending them. Zira shivered. He meant it. Not just the slavers at the auction house. Not just the ones who had chased them. All of them. Slate sat down with a heavy sigh. We've taken down a few syndicate operations, but nothing big. No one's ever gone after them like Daniel has. Zira's mind spun. She had thought this was just a rescue mission. She thought Daniel was just another outlaw, a rogue with a hero complex. But she had been wrong. Daniel wasn't saving people. He was waging a war. And now, she was part of it. She wasn't sure if she wanted to be. Zira's warning. Later, Zira stood near the viewing deck, staring at the void of space. Zira joined her, leaning against the railing. You look like someone who just found out the sky is fake, the feline alien said. Zira didn't respond. Zira sighed. Let me guess. You're wondering if you should stay. Zira hesitated. Should I? Zira's tail flicked. Depends. You want to live your life running, or do you want to make sure no one ever puts chains on you again? Zira turned toward her. You believe in him, don't you? Zira's emerald eyes narrowed slightly. I believe in what we're doing, and I believe in one thing above all. Humans don't lose. Zira exhaled. And what if he does? Zira smirked. Then we all die together. A choice to make. Zira found Daniel in the cockpit, sitting in the pilot's chair, staring at the holographic map of Syndicate-controlled space. She stepped inside. Where do we go next? Daniel didn't look away from the map. That depends. Are you staying? Zira hesitated. Daniel finally looked at her. I won't force you. If you want, I'll drop you off at the next safe world. No syndicate, no danger. You'll be free. Zira swallowed. And if I stay? Daniel's eyes were steady. Then you fight. She looked at the map. Red syndicate strongholds burned across the galaxy like a disease. Zira thought about the chains on her wrists, the slavers who had taken her, the burning bodies of 40 Valari prisoners whom never got a chance to be free. She thought about the way Daniel never stopped fighting. She took a deep breath. Then, she reached forward and tapped the map on one of the syndicate strongholds. Let's make them pay. Daniel grinned. Zira had chosen her war, the last stand, the plan that shouldn't work. The holographic map of syndicate space flickered in front of the crew. Red markers pulsed like bloodstains, each representing an enemy stronghold. Zira stared at the flashing dots, her fingers twitching. She had chosen this. She had stepped into a war that wasn't hers. And yet, now it was. Daniel leaned forward, arms resting on the table. His expression was sharp, focused. This is Station Veros 9, he said, pointing to the largest red marker, one of the syndicate's biggest slave hubs. Thousands of prisoners cycle through here every month. We take it down. We don't just save lives. We burn a hole in their empire. Slate grunted. You say that like we're not going up against a goddamn fortress. Shura flicked her tail. We are. Zira's stomach twisted. She had seen the syndicate's power. They had warships, assassins, mercenaries. She had been one of their products, their currency. Now she was aiming to destroy them. She looked at Daniel. What's the plan? Daniel smirked. Oh, you're gonna love this. Breaking into hell. Veros 9 loomed ahead, a massive space station wrapped in spiked black metal, its outer hull crawling with gun turrets and security drones. Ships came and went, each carrying human cargo bound for unknown fates. Zira swallowed hard. That could have been me. Now she was coming back as a soldier. Daniel adjusted his disguise, a stolen syndicate officer's uniform. He looked the part, dangerous, commanding, cold. The kind of person Zira had once feared. Now she knew better. The Solace drifted toward the docking bay. Inside the ship, the rest of the crew was waiting for the signal. If this went wrong, they wouldn't make it out. The moment the docking clamps locked onto their ship, Daniel stood. You ready? He asked Zira. She exhaled. She wasn't, but she had to be. She nodded. Let's end this. The wolf among monsters. The station's air was thick with smoke, sweat, and desperation. Slaves were marched through metal corridors, shackled and silent, their eyes hollow. Guards stood like statues, their blasters humming. Zira felt her body tense. Her people, all people, should never have to live like this. A syndicate officer approached Daniel, scanning his stolen ID badge. The alien squinted at him. You're not on today's roster. Daniel didn't blink. You questioning a transport officer, or do I have to file a report? The officer hesitated. Fear, that's how the syndicate operated, from the top down. No, sir. Good. Now get out of my way. Zira followed Daniel through the checkpoint, her pulse pounding. They were in. Now came the hard part. Lighting the fire, deep in the engine sector, Sura and Slate were planting charges. If the explosives went off, it would disable the station's defenses, giving them a chance to escape. Meanwhile, Zira and Daniel moved through the prison blocks, searching for the control room. The halls were lined with cells, filled with aliens of all kinds, trapped behind glowing force fields. Zira's heart ached. She had been one of them. Daniel, she whispered, we have to get them out. Daniel nodded. That's why we're here. They'd reached the security hub, a massive control room guarded by 2 heavily armed syndicate enforcers. Daniel motioned for her to wait. Then he moved like a ghost. A flash of silver, a knife into the first guard's throat. A silenced pistol. The second guard dropped before he could scream. Zira barely breathed. She would never get used to watching Daniel kill. But these men weren't innocent. Daniel stepped over the bodies and started hacking into the control panel. The prison logs flickered onto the screen. Zira's breath caught. There are over 3,000 prisoners on this station. Daniel smirked. Not for long. He pressed a button. Every single cell door unlocked. The rebellion begins. Sirens screamed across the station. Guards rushed to control the chaos, but there were too many prisoners. The slaves, many of them fighters before their capture, grabbed weapons, turned on their captors, and the battle erupted. Sura's voice crackled over the comms. We're out of time. We need to blow the charges. Daniel grabbed Zura's hand and ran. The station shook violently as the first explosions detonated. Smoke filled the corridors. The escape pods were flooding with newly freed prisoners. Daniel pushed through the chaos. Get to the ship. Now. Zira turned, just in time to see the Syndicate commander step forward. A scared, towering alien with cybernetic arms and glowing red eyes. I remember you, he snarled. You were nothing. Zira froze. Daniel raised his pistol, but the commander moved first. His metal fist slammed into Daniel's ribs, sending him crashing into a wall. Zira's world blurred. The commander grabbed her by the throat. You think you're free, he hissed. You think a human can save you. Zira's fear melted. No, not this time. With every ounce of strength, she drove her elbow into his throat, then grabbed his own shock baton and jammed it against his chest. The alien screamed as thousands of volts surged through his body. Zira grabbed Daniel's blaster and fired. The commander fell, dead. She turned, breathing hard. Daniel staggered to his feet, grinning despite the pain. Hell of a shot, he muttered. Zira grabbed his arm, pulling him forward. Let's get the hell out of here. The fall of Heroism. As they ran onto the Solace, the station tore itself apart behind them. The moment they were aboard, Slate gunned the engines, and they shot out of the docking bay just as the final explosion ripped through the core. Heroism, once a symbol of the Syndicate's power, collapsed in fire and wreckage. The prisoners had escaped. The Syndicate had lost. And for the first time, Zira felt something she never had before. Not just freedom. Power. She turned to Daniel, her heart still racing. We're not done, are we? Daniel smirked. Not even close. Zira nodded. This war wasn't over. But now she wasn't running. Now she was fighting. Chains broken, freedom won. The aftermath of war. The Solace drifted through the wreckage of Heroism, the once mighty slave station now a burning graveyard. Zira stood near the viewing window, her hands gripping the cold metal frame. It was over. The Syndicate's fortress, their prison, their factory of misery, gone. She could still see the escape pods, hundreds of them, drifting toward the safety of nearby systems, filled with the newly freed. Some had been prisoners for years, others had lost all hope, yet now they were alive. And she had helped make that happen. A year ago, she would have never imagined herself here, standing beside outlaws, fighting like a warrior, staring down an empire and winning. Daniel stood beside her, his arms crossed. His face was bruised, his ribs probably cracked from the fight, but his eyes carried that same fire, the one that never dimmed, no matter how many battles he fought. They'll come back, Zira said softly. They always do, Daniel replied. But next time, they won't be as strong. Zira turned to him. And us. Daniel smirked. Stronger than ever. The price of freedom. The bridge of the Solace was alive with the buzz of victory. Zira patched up Daniel's injuries with steady hands. Slate sat near the controls, watching the scanners for Syndicate reinforcements, and Zira couldn't stop shaking. She had killed, not just in self-defense, She had chosen to end a life, and she didn't regret it. She should have. She had spent her whole life believing violence wasn't the answer. But the syndicate, they didn't stop. They never stopped. She met Sura's sharp green eyes. The feline-like alien tilted her head. You look different. Zira swallowed. I feel different. Shura smirked. Good. You should. Zira frowned. Should I? Sura's tail flicked. You were a slave yesterday. Today, you're a soldier. Zira's stomach tightened. Was that what she was now? She turned to Daniel, who had been silent, watching her. What now? She asked. Daniel exhaled. We find another target. Zira's brow furrowed. Just like that. Daniel leaned forward, his blue eyes sharp. Did you think one victory would end this war? Silence. Zira knew the answer. Of course not. But she had hoped, just for a moment, that maybe they had done enough. Then she remembered Veros 9 wasn't the only one. There were dozens of syndicate strongholds. Hundreds. This fight wasn't over. It had just begun. The syndicate's response. The comm system crackled suddenly. Slate's 4 yellow eyes narrowed. Incoming transmission. Encrypted. Daniel nodded. Put it through. The holoprojector flickered, and a face appeared. A syndicate High Lord. Zara's breath caught. This alien was different from the slavers she had seen. He wore ornate robes, his skin a deep violet, his eyes glowing with calm cruelty. Behind him, a burning insignia pulsed, a symbol Zyra recognized from nightmares. The overlords of the syndicate. The alien spoke in a voice smooth as poison. Captain Carter, he said, smiling. You have caused quite a mess. Daniel leaned against the console. Yeah, thought it looked better this way. The alien chuckled. You amuse me, human. You think yourself a hero, but you are nothing more than a dog barking at giants. Daniel's smirk didn't waver. Yeah. Last time I checked, dogs bite. The alien's smile vanished. You have made enemies you cannot comprehend. The syndicate does not fall to outlaws. Daniel's voice turned cold. Then you don't know outlaws. The alien's eyes flicked toward Zira. She felt a chill run down her spine. Ah, the syndicate lord purred. The little Valari. The lost one. Zira's fists clenched. You think you are free. The alien whispered. You are a fool. The syndicate does not forget. It does not forgive. And when we take you again, we will not waste time selling you. Daniel's jaw tightened. That was a threat. Zira stepped forward before she could stop herself. I'm not afraid of you, she said. The alien tilted his head. Then you are more foolish than I thought. The screen cut to black. Silence hung in the air. Daniel exhaled. Well, guess we pissed them off. Shura grinned. Good. Zira's choice. Later that night, Zira stood outside the cargo bay, staring at the stars. She heard footsteps behind her. Daniel, you did good today, he said. She turned to face him. I killed someone. Daniel didn't flinch. Yeah. She looked away. I thought I'd feel guilty. Do you? She exhaled. No. Daniel nodded slowly. That's what happens when you fight for something bigger than yourself. Zira met his gaze. How do you live with it? Daniel's face was unreadable. I don't. She frowned. Then why keep fighting? He looked out at the stars. Because if we don't, no one else will. Zara's heart pounded. A week ago, she had been a prisoner. Now, she was staring into the abyss of war. And she wasn't afraid. She should have been. But she wasn't. She understood now. This wasn't just about her anymore. She turned to Daniel. What's next? She asked. Daniel grinned. Now, we burn the rest of them down. Zira smiled. She was ready.